Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Started by a group of citizens in a small Michigan town with a like-minded goal
of increasing the visibility
of the unseen and unheard populations in our community.
Our guests will share stories and insights
with the goal of increasing our awareness and knowledge
of various aspects of diversity and equity
to create a more connected, empathetic, and inclusive community.
So, let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
So let's get to work.
So let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
In this month's episode, we will be joined by Pattie Veith-Powers and Camille Gerace-Nitschky as we focus on the topic of grief and loss. Our two guests will share their deeply personal experiences along with their expertise in grief. Pattie grew up in Wisconsin and is a graduate of University of Wisconsin-Madison. She has spent most of her adult life in Michigan and currently lives in Midland with her husband, Brian. Pattie and Brian have 3 kids at home and 4 kids at college. Pattie loves to travel, is passionate about gardening, and spends as much of her summers as possible in the Upper Peninsula. Camille is the executive director of Children's Grief Center of the Great Lakes Bay region. The center's mission is to provide a healing environment through peer support for children, teens, and their families grieving a death. She founded the center in 2014 based on the Dougie Center model, a nationally recognized provider of grief support and training. She's fondly referred to as the Grief Lady, a name she has grown to love and be honored to hold.
Well, welcome, Pattie and Camille. I'm so happy to have you with us today. Thank you so much for taking the time and for having the courage to come with us today and tell your personal stories. So welcome. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start off with the easy question, right? I just want to know a little bit more about you and get to know you. So I think, Pattie, I'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself briefly, about your background and maybe what you're passionate about? What do you do for fun? What about your family?
Well, I'm a stay-at-home mom. I have 4 kids and 3 stepkids. I love to garden. I love to travel. I've lived a lot of places, and I guess I just love to explore the world.
Fantastic. You and me both. I'm a traveler and explorer. I love it. Camille, how about you? Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
So my background is in art and photography. I was a commercial photographer at one point, and then I started to study massage, and I've done massage therapy and body work for 25 years. And I love doing anything outside or that involves with the creative process of just doing anything with your hands or your mind or your eyes or whatever it is that's just helps you kind of escape to that place of escape.
Well, thank you both so much. It's really great to meet you both. So as we start out today, when we're talking today about grief and the loss of a loved one, and I always like to start off with just some definitions to see if there's any language that we related to death and grief that we should be mindful of, or any words or phrases that we should maybe avoid. Camille, maybe I'll start with you to see if there's anything on your side that you can help us with.
Well, I love the question because our society doesn't always do well with death, and just the fact that you use the word death. We're very concrete in the work that I do. If you say to a 5-year-old, "I'm sorry you lost your daddy," they're like, "Oh, where is he? Let's go find him, hide and seek." So I've really learned to use the D word, dead, died, death, and also just honoring that space of that. Everybody does things differently, and everybody's on their own unique journey, and there's no set way to do this.
So Pattie, I'm going to start with you. I'd love to hear from both of you, but I'll start with you, Pattie. Would you be willing to share your personal story related to the loss of a loved one and how you've experienced grief? Can you talk about your experiences with us today? And thank you for the courage for doing so.
Well, sure. Thank you for having me. I lost my husband, Andrew, to cancer a little over 9 years ago. And to tell you a little bit about Andrew, he was this amazing guy. He was, we met in college. I sat next to him in a giant lecture hall, and we were engaged 3 months later and married a semester before we graduated. He was this eternal optimist. He was smart. He was witty. He loved to sing. He had a beautiful voice and brought music everywhere. He was just this person that made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. He was really fantastic. He was everything. And we got married young. We were independent. We moved around a lot. We lived in 5 states in our first 8 years of marriage. And we came to live in Midland for about 5 years. And then we moved to the Middle East. We lived in Dubai for over 3 years. And we always said that we could, it didn't really matter where we were. We could make our home anywhere as long as we had each other. And we truly felt that way. And that's kind of how we lived. We had 4 kids together. He was an amazing father. He worked a lot. He traveled a lot with his job. But he was also an incredibly involved dad. He was the type of person that called me constantly to find out the little details about every day and what was going on with the kids. And when he was home, he was super involved. He did the bedtime routine. If he came home late, he'd wake the kids up to pop popcorn and have a dance party. You know, he was just this great guy, and he loved being a dad. It was, he was really an incredible person. Our friends, they teased him and called him super fun daddy, you know, because he was always the one that wanted to have fun with the kids. And when we were living in Dubai, our kids were quite young, and Andrew got sick. He hadn't been feeling well for a couple of weeks, and I didn't think much of it because the rest of the family had been sick. He went to the doctor a couple of times, was given antibiotics. He had a cough that wouldn't go away. We didn't think much of it. And then he woke up one morning and he was really short of breath, and he kind of knew something was wrong. And he was on his way to work, and he decided to drive to the emergency room instead. And they did a chest x-ray, and they found enlarged nodes up and down his chest. And he was having trouble breathing because his lungs were filled with fluid. And they weren't sure what was going on. And they told him that they suspected either a type of cancer or an infectious disease. He'd been traveling outside of the country a lot, and they thought that was a possibility. So they hospitalized him. And after a week and a lot of tests, they decided they wanted to do an exploratory surgery because they didn't know what was wrong. And that's when we decided to leave. We were, you know, in the Middle East. We decided to leave and come back to the United States. He called Mayo Clinic and told them what was going on. And 2 days later, we left. We left our home. We left, the kids left their school and their friends, and we left everything except what we took in our suitcases. And we left the country and didn't know if we were going to return. And we got to the US. My parents met us at the airport and took the kids, and we went to Mayo Clinic. And it took them over 2 weeks to diagnose him, but he was diagnosed with T-cell lymphoblastic lymphoma leukemia, which is a very unusual, very rare, aggressive form of cancer with a very bleak prognosis. And he didn't really care what the statistics were. He was this optimist, and he just said, okay, what do we need to do now? Like, you know, what's the treatment? He was ready to fight it. And he was treated for several months at Mayo Clinic. We lived in Minnesota, and our kids lived in Wisconsin with my parents. They changed schools again, went to school in Wisconsin. Andrew and I saw the kids about once a month when he was able to. And then after a few months, he went into remission. When he went into remission, we moved back to our house in Midland. And he was in remission for about 9 months, and then he relapsed. And when he relapsed, we had to go back to Minnesota. Kids had to switch schools again. This time we decided to rent a house in Minnesota for my parents to live in with the kids. They brought the kids there. And the kids went to school in Minnesota while he was being treated so we could see them more often. And they tried to get him into remission. He needed a stem cell transplant, but they never got him into remission. He was without an immune system for months. They tried experimental treatments. They tried everything because he was the most optimistic guy. I had doctors tell me more than once that we wouldn't really keep trying this with everybody, but he just wanted to keep fighting this. He wasn't ready. He didn't want to give up. And he ended up developing a fungal infection that spread to his brain. And about 36 hours before he died, I was told that he's going to die. This will kill him. We can't treat him anymore. The fungal infection's in his brain. And he did. He died 36 hours later. His last day he spent with me and with the kids. And they knew he was dying. And he died in my arms in the middle of the night. I don't think he wanted his kids to see him die. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that I was with him, but I'm also grateful that my kids don't have the memory of him taking his last breath, because that's something that's really hard to watch. And my kids were little. When Andrew died, my kids were 10, 8, 7, and 3 years old. So I was completely overwhelmed. I think that when he died, I was in shock, even though I had known for 18 months that he was sick. He was so determined to beat this that I think in my mind, I had to convince myself that he was going to beat it, that he was going to be okay. And so when he died, it was just, it was a shock for me. It really was. It was strange. And my kids were watching me to see if I was okay. They were bringing me their favorite stuffed animals, and they were trying to comfort me. And I even remember my daughter saying, "Mom, I'm sorry your husband died." And I looked at her and thought, really? Like, it was just strange, the kids' reaction. But I think that my focus after he died was the kids. They were great kids, and I was determined not to let this ruin their life. I realized that if I was crying in front of them, that they wouldn't function. They were too concerned about me. They wouldn't want to go to school. They wouldn't want to do the things that they needed to do. So I stopped crying in front of them. I used the shower as my time to grieve. I would get in the shower and I would sob. And that's where I did it. And then I would pull myself together, and I would just be very matter of fact with the kids about what we had to do for the day. And that's what we did. And that was the only way I could get them to function. And my kids, I found they all grieve differently. I think that it took a while. Once they saw that I was functioning and they were functioning and we were going about life, then their grief got worse. My son it had been about a year after his dad died, and one of my sons couldn't make it through the day at school. Every day I got called by the counselor to come in. He would just be overwhelmed with grief at school, and he couldn't make it through the day. And I had to pull him out of school constantly, almost every day, and it was heartbreaking. As a parent, you want to fix things, and there's nothing you could do to fix this, and the kids were so different. My daughter was different in that she just, from the moment her dad died, she talked very openly about it, and she cried in front of me. And she was little, and sometimes she'd get mad at me for not crying, and she'd think that I didn't love her dad because I wasn't crying. I mean, that was really a hard thing for her to see. I had another son who was angry about everything. He was so angry. I ended up buying him a punching bag at one point, so he had somewhere to get his anger out. But he didn't want to talk. He wouldn't talk to me about it. He was just angry. And then I had a toddler, and he was just a handful, and he didn't understand. And his grief came out much later, and we dealt with that at a later time. But I think that, we realized right away we needed help, but even as time went on, it wasn't like we just needed help right away. We were a year into it, 2 years into it, and we just needed help. And I realized there were certain things that my kids did, like they had switched schools so many times. They'd been bounced around in schools. And when they came to a new school in Midland here, they didn't want their friends to know that their dad had died. I think one of my sons said, "Everybody will think I'm weird if I tell them my dad died, so I just don't tell them." And I realized that they really needed ways to process this. They needed people to talk to, and we needed more than that we had. And I think I really started searching for resources and ways to help us get through this. The kids and I all went to individual grief counseling separately. We all did counseling, and we did that for a long time. But that wasn't enough. It was helpful to have counseling, but it wasn't enough. I know there was a weekend grief camp that my kids went to like soon after their dad died, and they loved it, and it was great, but it was only a weekend. That wasn't going to solve everything. My kids, they participated in an organization called Camp Chasm. It's a camp for kids who are affected by a parent's cancer. It was something we actually learned of when their dad was sick. And they went to the camp for the first 2 summers before he died, and they loved it. And then after he died, they continued. And to this day, it's been 9 years, and my kids still go to Camp Chasm. It's a really important organization for them. And what I found with the camp, that they realized they kept these friends that they kept in touch with because they could tell these friends anything. My daughter had a friend at camp who had her dad's ashes in her bear that she slept with. And my daughter wanted that too. My daughter had a bear with her dad's voice in it that we recorded right before dad died, but his ashes weren't in there. And she asked me if she could put some of her dad's ashes in her bear. And I did. I sewed some of the ashes into the bear for her. But to her, because she could go to a camp like that where she could talk to other kids, this was a normal thing. And it kind of normalized death, I guess. And so that was such an important thing for them. But the problem was it was, once a year that they really had this, that they had this week once a year, and they needed more. And I remember somebody telling me about Camille and how she was going to be starting a local children's grief center. And somebody gave me her email address, and I just sat down, and I was in a really bad place, and I sent her an email, and I said, look, this is my story. This is what's going on. I have these 4 kids, and I don't know what to do. And Camille reached out to me, and she was, a couple months later, she had started this children's grief center. We were one of the first families. And that was probably the best thing that I did for my kids, because once a week or once every other week they went, and they could talk about their real feelings, and kids didn't look at them like they were weird. It wasn't weird to have someone die, and it was okay to talk about it, and it was okay to be mad, and it was okay to just have all these feelings that they had, but it was normal because everybody else had been through that. And the peer support was something that was needed more than I guess I would have ever thought. But they really needed that. And they loved going. My son, who was 3 at the time, I guess he was probably about 5 by the time we went. We'd be in the car one day, and we were on our way there, and he turned and he looked behind him. He said, "Do you think all the people behind us are going to grief group too, Mom?" And I thought, oh yeah, we're all grieving. We're all on our way to grief group, But for him, it was just normal that this is what people do. They go to grief group every couple of weeks, It was just kind of cute, but that was neat. They could talk openly, and they felt less alone. And they really needed to go to the Children's Grief Center. And I found that I had to find other resources for me as well. I did the grief counseling. I tried, right after Andrew died, I tried a traditional widow support group that was through hospice, I think. And I didn't fit in. I was the only one that had young kids. Everybody else had been older. The kids were grown. And they had lost their spouse at a different stage in life. And I didn't fit in, and I couldn't relate to them because my experience was so different. I found that I couldn't talk to the people that I loved the most. I'm very close to my parents and to my sisters, and I couldn't really tell them how I was feeling because I just felt like other people wouldn't understand. Even my closest friends, I couldn't tell them. And so I really felt really alone. A few of my friends in town, actually, they reached out and found some people locally who were widowed at a young age, and they kind of set me up with these local widows. And that was one of the best things they could have done. I didn't realize it at the time, but I went out to coffee with people that I had never met, and they would tell me their story. And when I heard their story, I could turn around and tell them mine. And I think just knowing somebody else had been through something similar, I could spill my guts out to a perfect stranger where I couldn't to somebody I'd known my whole life or that I was really close to. And I could tell a perfect stranger all of my feelings and everything that was going through my mind. And just because it was this connection that we had both experienced something similar. I think when I realized how helpful that was, I had a friend that told me of another organization called Soaring Spirits International. It's an organization for widows and widowers. They run weekend events that they actually call Camp Widow. And it's an international thing. I went to 2 of them in Florida on different weekends and 2 in Toronto, I think. And they were the best weekends I had ever done because people were widowed at very different stages. There were widows in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and it was incredible. I was 39 when I was widowed, and I had 4 young kids, and I found so many people who were in the exact same situation. And there were workshops you could sign up for depending on what stage of grief you were in. And we wore name tags, and mine said 2 years because it had been 2 years since my husband died. Somebody said 1 month, somebody said 10 years, but everybody knew what it meant. It meant how long it had been since you lost your person. And it was the best thing. That was the best thing that I had done for myself, because I was able to talk through all of these things about parenting and finances and all of these things that I worried about as a widow. And I could talk to other widows about it. Later on, I think I had gone to one of them 4 years after I had been widowed. And it was when I was, starting to date again. And I could go to workshops about how to date again and how to, I had to process feelings of feeling like I wasn't cheating on my dead husband, I guess, in order to be able to date again.
Sure.
And that was incredibly helpful too. So these peer support things, I found, my kids needed them, but I needed them just as well. I actually don't know how I would have gotten through this without these types of organizations. Also, I think sometimes when you're widowed, it's you feel like if you see somebody in the community and you don't look like you're grieving, they assume you're okay. So it's funny because you just, you try to compartmentalize your life, where you put those feelings back so that you can function, and people will say, oh, I saw her, she's doing fine. And I'll think I'm a mess. They have no idea, but when I was with these groups, I could cry 1 minute and then I could turn around and just laugh about something, and it was all okay. It was all okay. And it was just a safe place. That was just a good thing for me. I think that people don't always know what to say when someone is grieving. And I think that's hard. I have lots of times where people really, said things that were really hurtful. And I know that people don't mean it, but it really is hard. I even had one time, it was soon after Andrew had died, that I was in the grocery store and I saw a woman that I had previously been pretty good friends with. And she caught my eye, she saw me, and she just turned around and went the other way. And I guess she didn't, it made her uncomfortable. She knew he had died, but I don't think she knew what to say, and she didn't want to talk to me. And that was really hurtful, to think that someone would avoid me because I had lost a spouse and they didn't know what to say. And I look at that now and think, wow, okay, if that made you uncomfortable, how do you think I felt? I'm the one that lost the spouse, So that was hard. At Andrew's funeral, somebody said to my 10-year-old son, they looked at him and said, well, I guess now you're the man of the house. Mm-hmm. And I was just dumbfounded. I couldn't believe someone would say that to a 10-year-old. And I looked at them and said, no, he's just a kid. And that's all I could say. My son, my oldest son, who was only 10, he did grow up too fast, and he did feel like he had to take care of me. And when he could tell something was wrong, he was always concerned about me. And I didn't want that for him. I wanted him to be a kid. I had people tell me that Andrew was in a better place, and I thought, well, you know what? I thought he was doing just fine here with me and the kids, so that's not comforting, and regardless of your belief, that's not comforting to tell someone
Right.
that they're in a better place. At least to me, it wasn't. That was a hard thing. One time I was watching my daughter's dance rehearsal and I had tears in my eyes, and one of the other moms looked at me and she said, oh, are you okay? What's wrong? And I said, no, I'm okay. I said, I just wish her dad was here to see her. I was kind of overwhelmed by grief. And she looked at me and said, when will you just get over it?
Oh,
And I thought, really? I didn't even have a response to that. But sometimes people think, okay, it's been a few years. Why can't you just get over it and just move on? So I guess I did lose friends because my grief made them uncomfortable. And some people chose to avoid me because of that. And that's, but then again, I can also I have so many examples of people that were amazing. When Andrew was sick, he told me that if he died, I should sell the house and move in with my parents for a while. And I told him, well, if you die, I'm going to do whatever I want. So, I decided to come back to Midland, where I had friends and I knew people and my neighbors knew me, and it was the right thing to do. I had this amazing community of people. I remember the first big snowfall after he died. School was canceled. I didn't have anywhere to go, but I looked out my window and there were 4 men working on my driveway. And I was just amazed. They were my neighbors. They knew Andrew, they knew me, and they just wanted to take care of me. And they just wanted to do whatever they could to help. And to me, that was pretty amazing to see that. I had one of Andrew's coworkers approach me soon after he died because he thought my oldest son might benefit from joining Boy Scouts. And he was involved in a Boy Scout troop. And he said, I really think this would be a good thing for him. And I said, well, I think it would be as well. I said, the problem is I have a 3-year-old who goes to sleep at 7:30. I can't do an 8:30 pickup every week. That's not going to work for me. I can't wake him up. And he said, no, he said, I will get him and I will bring him home. And he did that every single week. He got him, he brought him to events. It was never an issue for me, but he just decided that that was what he was going to do to help. And that was an incredible thing. I had a neighbor, I found a lot of people brought meals to us right at the funeral. And then when the funeral's done, that stops, which is okay. I can cook, but I have a neighbor that she just kept bringing me a meal at least once a week, just because she knew it was just something she could do. And she used to say, oh, I just made too much, and then she'd always, once a week or so, she'd bring us a meal. And it was, I don't think she realizes what that meant, but it really meant a lot. And I had another neighbor who every night at 8 p.m., she would knock on the door, she'd come in and she'd read stories to my older kids so that I could put my toddler to bed. And she did that for a year. She helped me with the bedtime routine for an entire year, because bedtime was hard. That's when my kids missed their dad the most. So having that distraction and having somebody else there really made it easy for us. And then for me, I had friends that what they did, which was so amazing, that every time there was a social event or a party that I was invited to, because I had previously been friends with all these people as well, they would offer to pick me up and bring me home, because it was so hard to show up alone to something after I had been a part of a couple for so long. So the fact that somebody was always including me and, letting me go to things with them really meant a lot too, because I didn't have to walk into a party by myself, So I had a neighbor who, he told me that if something goes wrong with the house, let me come over and see if I can fix it before you call a plumber or call a professional. And he did. He came over and he would check it out, and he would tell me, don't get rid of any of your tools. And he'd go out in the garage and fix what he could. And if I couldn't, he'd tell me if I needed to call somebody. But it was really great to have people that would do that for me. And it's humbling to need to accept help. But when it's amazing. I guess all I can hope is that I can pay these things forward someday and help other people when they need it, because these things that may have seemed little to my neighbors and my friends, they were huge to me, and they still are huge to me. And now it's been 9 years, I guess, and I'm happy. I can truly say that I'm doing okay, and I'm happy, and I've been remarried for almost 5 years, and I have my 4 kids and 3 step kids, which I truly love. I have an amazing husband, and I always tell my husband that he's the most beautiful surprise of my life, because I never thought I'd feel happy again. And it's true. That's really how I feel. I always thought, oh, if I get remarried, I'll have to settle, but I didn't. I was able to find somebody to truly love. And the neat thing is I'm also able to still truly have this love for Andrew. One person doesn't replace another. And it's kind of incredible that I'm able to do that. And it's pretty neat. In my heart, I guess I know that my husband, Brian, he's who Andrew would have chosen to raise his kids if he couldn't be here. And I know that, so it's kind of amazing that I'm in this good place. And but the grief is still always there. You can be completely happy with your life and the grief still comes out. I think I learned to tuck it away, and it doesn't come out all the time. But there are times where it really comes out. Every year, the anniversary of Andrew's death is the hardest for me. He died in the fall, and I think when the weather changes, it triggers something. And I remember all of the scary things that happened right before he died. And I remember the really scary, hard times. I have nightmares. That's a really hard time for me to get through. And it's like that every year, and it doesn't get any easier. Every time there's a milestone, when my oldest son graduated high school, when I had to move him into his dorms, it's always bittersweet, because we just wish his dad could be there, so that's a hard thing. And my kids are doing great. I'm proud of them. I mean, they've had to grow up too fast. They had to learn a lot about grief and death, way more than any kid should have to. But they haven't let their dad's death define who they are. They're hardworking, smart kids. They're empathetic. My oldest sons, they have good friends who've recently lost a dad, and they reached out. They went to his funeral. They reached out to these kids, and they wanted to provide support because they know what it's like. My oldest sons have also done Eagle Scout projects, both of them for the Children's Grief Center. And that's what they knew what they wanted to do. Right away, they knew that because that's the organization that helped them. And they felt so proud to be able to, do something for the organization and give back to them. My oldest son is now the Camp Kesem, the cancer camp that my kids had gone to. My oldest son is at University of Michigan, and he is an operations coordinator. It's a volunteer position for Camp Kesem through the University of Michigan. And he puts a lot of hours and a lot of love into it, but that camp has meant so much to him. So he works hard on it, and he's excited to be able to give back. And my second son will be there as well next year, and he's already talking about volunteering for Camp Kesem. So it's kind of neat to see this come around and to see my kids want to do something for the organizations that have helped them. I think, though, my kids are still processing grief, and I think they always will. They process it at different times. Milestones are always hard for them because they wish their dad was there. But, it's also different based on their age. My youngest son was only 3 when his dad died, and he didn't really start processing his grief until he was about 8. And then he Googled his name, and his dad's obituary popped up. And he said, "Mom, did you realize there was something out there about Dad?" And I guess I realized he had never seen it. And I said, "Yeah, I wrote that, And so that started this whole grief thing. And we had to explain his illness and his death and cremation and all of these things. I had to start over with him and explain these things. And he started going to the Children's Grief Center then at a later time because he needed to process these things. And for him, it's hard because he doesn't remember his dad. He doesn't remember him at all. He remembers doing a few things with him, and he has pictures of him and videos of him, but he doesn't remember his dad. And sometimes he gets mad at the other kids because they have the memories and he doesn't. My kids, now that they're older, the older kids that are teenagers, now they ask about their dad's exact diagnosis. They want to know exactly what he had. Is it hereditary? What are my chances of getting it? What did that mean? And they look up the diagnosis to understand it better. They process, even now they've asked about my grief and how I was grieving. And I didn't explain to them recently until recently about how, when your dad first died, I would cry in the shower. I'd take long showers and I would just sob. And, like I said, my daughter thought I wasn't crying. She thought I didn't miss her dad, and I had to explain that this is how I had to do it so that you would function. It's so the kids, they process it all at different times, I think. And sorry. Okay, I guess if you were going to ask for advice, what to do when somebody is grieving, I think the hardest thing would be, so many people would say, "Just call me if you need anything." And I would think, I'm not going to call you. And I never did. I never picked up the phone and just called somebody because I don't think that I had the energy to do it. The most helpful thing was when somebody just did something, or just thought of something I could use, or thought, I'm going to just bring her a meal, or I'm just going to pick up the kids and take them to a movie. I'm going to come read stories to the kids. I never asked for this, but it was so incredibly helpful when people just thought of something and did something. And it was so helpful when people thought of things that went on after the funeral, because at the funeral, everybody's here and everybody's helping, but after the funeral, life goes back to normal. And that's a really lonely time and a really hard time to try to figure things out. So having people reach out after that is incredibly helpful. I've learned things. I've learned not to judge people. Everybody grieves differently, and they'll make different choices with how they do it. And I especially learned this talking to all the widowed friends I had met when I went to this Camp Widow event. Some people, their spouse dies and they immediately sell their homes and they move away and they get new jobs and they start everything completely differently. Some people hide out in their homes, which is kind of what I was doing, and never go anywhere because they just don't want to. I knew people that started dating right away because that's what they needed to do. And then there were people like me that were afraid to date. And it was this big, scary thing for me. And I guess I just learned you really can't judge. Everybody's experience is different. And I think people do what they need to do to just get by. And it's not easy. And it's a hard thing, but people can get through it, but you can't get through it without a lot of resources, a lot of people, a lot of help.
Pattie, again, thank you so much for the courage to share your story and your journey and all of the ups and downs and emotions. And I know that our listeners couldn't see, but I know that all of us on the call here are teary-eyed as well. And it personally helped me a lot just hearing your story. I know it's going to help so many of our listeners as well. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Camille, I want to pass off to you just a little bit because we heard so many great things about the Children's Grief Center through Pattie's story. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Children's Grief Center, kind of its background and what kind of services and support it can offer to those who need the support?
Sure. So first of all, too, just hearing Pattie's story, I mean, I still have the email that she sent. That was like one of my first families, first person that called or emailed me and said, I heard you're doing this and can we come? And it's hard to get excited about having people come to you because they're grieving, but there's a sense of like, you get to offer them hope. Everybody always says, well, it sounds so sad. And it's like, you would never know if you're walking by the door where there's kids at group, that it's a grief group. Or even walking by, we have adults come at the same time. The adults, it's a harder group because, they don't always get to play, but we have learned to bring in craft activities and stuff for them to do while they're talking. But it's just the process that they go through to do their work. When kids do their work, I mean, when they play, they're doing their work. They don't even realize that they're learning how to, I'm going to attach sadness to blue and I'm going to put green to fear and I'm going to put those in a bottle. So they're learning how to identify their feelings and then shake them up in a calm down bottle and then take a breath and let them just settle. The Children's Grief Center was started in 2014 and I got a call from a friend of mine. I'm just driving down the road, nice casual, minding my own business. And my background is massage and art. And my mom died when I was in my 30s. And I remember feeling very sorry for myself because she was my best friend. And I was on a vacation and I met a man who had 2 4-year-old twin daughters whose mom had just died. And I remember at that point saying to myself, as painful as it was that my mom died when she did, that I would try to never feel sorry for myself because I couldn't imagine having my mom die at 4. And I think that was kind of setting the pace for what was to come. And 2013, my sister died and my dad died a month later. And I had a 13-year-old who adored both of them. And then this guy calls me 6 months later, my friend John, and says, we were going to start a grief center at our hospice house. And we're not going to do it anymore because it doesn't really fit our mission. And I think you should do it. And I was like, really? And he said, yeah, they use art. And I love art. He said, it's grief. And I was like, oh, I know about grief. And I've got a 13-year-old that I'm going to be kind of, putting the pillows around to try to protect from it, which you can't do anyways. And he said, and it's peer support. And I've used different models of peer support in my own life. And I thought, oh, I know how to do that. I can have a little meeting and keep my mouth shut and create sacred space for people to share and relate to each other. And that was like the seed. And I was just naive enough to go, yeah, okay, we can do this. And so that was October of 2013. And he said, well, you could probably if you get rolling, you can probably write your own 501c application and, you could probably have groups by the fall. And I was just naive enough to go, okay. And we got the ball rolling. And we have a wonderful community. And one of the women that Pattie was talking about, Elizabeth, she was one of my first board members. And she had conversation with Pattie. And she had her husband had died young. And Elizabeth would say about going to a grief group, and it would all be that she'd be like the youngest one. And so I think the crucial piece in all of this for me too is that it's peer support. It's like the value of having someone else who actually does know how you feel, even though their circumstance might be a little bit different, they know how you feel. And so you get a sense that okay, I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. They just said something I've been thinking and too afraid to say. And so that whole model of peer support is very healing. I love counseling. I love all the other things too that Pattie talked about, but there is a magic that happens with peer support, especially with kids, because we've been told over and over where, they might be doing one-on-one and you get them in group and with their peers, they don't stop talking. The teens don't stop talking. And it also brings in topics that if they are in counseling, then they talk about those different things that come up with their counselors. Or we really try to create a space where the adults might be doing an activity in group where they do like a mask and it says what's on the inside of the mask that they don't want to tell people. And then they'll do the outside. It'll be the things that they do show people. And by having the adults do them as well as the kids, they get in the car on their way home and the child goes, oh, Mom, you've got fear on the inside of your mask. What are you afraid of? And some of the things that have come up, well, the child's like, well, I think I'm afraid you're going to die because Dad died. And the parent, the adult says in group, well, I'm afraid, what happens if something happens to me? And they're all kind of feeling the same thing. And as soon as somebody says something, so many things that Pattie said resonated about what I hear in group. And I see how each child grieves differently. The adult grieves differently. The adult's protecting the child's protecting the adult. By having this space where they can have conversation, sometimes they never talk about the person. When our kids come to group, it always looks the same where we have it's like opening circle and they go around and they say, my name's John and I'm 10 and my dad died. And my favorite rule is, we have like 8 rules. So they're basically kind of saying facts about themselves. They aren't the kid whose dad died. I'm John. I'm 10. My dad died. And my favorite rule is I passed. So guess what? I don't have to talk if I don't want to. And John usually talks the most. So it's just amazing when you set that, that space for them to have control and be able to talk about what they want to talk about, to be able to go out and go play gaga ball and hit the ball or hit a punching bag or use a puppet. You want a child to speak to you, put a puppet on their hand. And we have a wonderful program where our volunteers have, extensive training, and basically they learn how to listen and they learn how to not try to fix people. And they learn reflective listening, because when you say to a child, our instincts as adults, we always say in training, you're Switzerland. Like as soon as the child says, my dad died, most people, if you said that in a space, they'd be like, oh, and they may get the head tilt, and our volunteers go, oh, your dad died. And then there's, yeah, and then, and then they reflect that. And I'm speaking at Rotary, right? And I'm telling my little story about the Grief Center. I showed my video. Pattie's kids are in the video, and her youngest is in the video. And the president of Rotary gets up to give me my little thank you for speaking today. And he goes, I was at baseball this last summer. And one of the kids on my kids' team came up to me and he kind of nudges me and he starts talking to me and he starts telling me how his dad died. And he starts telling me, a story about his dad. And at the time I thought, well, that's interesting. He's like, but it's not peculiar at all now because I just saw him in your video.
Sure.
And so, we create a space where when that child does that opening circle the first time, it might be the first time they said it out loud, let alone in front of a group of other kids. But when every kid in that circle says it, it's empowering. It's a sense of guess what? I belong to this group. I really didn't want to sign up to be in the grief group, but guess what? If I'm going to, undergo or be part of this tragic thing that happened to me, having these other people that are on the same path walking beside me, I know we can do this. And Pattie said it too. The kids that go through this, your children, people, learn skills that most of us adults don't learn until, we actually have somebody die when we're older. And so, in terms you talk about post-traumatic stress, but when you work through your grief, and my background as a massage therapist, I saw people come to me that had things happen and it would come out in their body or it would come out in their mental. If you aren't doing your work with whatever kind of stress is going on in your life, it will come out negatively. And there's all sorts of data about the negative effects of, unresolved grief, and then post-traumatic growth is what happens when you actually are doing your work.
Can I jump onto that topic more? Because
Absolutely.
I think at some point, right, Pattie alluded to this too. Like for her, it was sobbing in the shower and trying to deal with the day-to-day task of taking care of our kids and going back to work, and this expectation that, hey, you know what, life goes on. Get like, and people very Pattie or one person obtusely said, right, get over it. Like there's this expectation in society that we all, and reality too, that we also have to continue on with life in some form. But how can, I guess, a few questions on this is like, how can we balance all these things when, especially as we're dealing with grief? But on a follow-up to that, to your last point, Camille, I've experienced this too, where, sometimes you bottle down those feelings and don't want to bring them up, or you're trying to get through the day, so you try to bottle down these feelings. Some people may feel that they need to hide their grief for a variety of reasons. So what can we say in those situations? I guess two parts to that. Like, one, how can we balance all of our things that have to get done in life, right, while dealing with this? And then two, when people feel that need to either hide or bury their grief, is there a way that we can help either ourselves to get to a point where we're able to communicate, or is there a way that we can help others to realize what support groups there are and ways to help in a healthy manner to go about confronting those feelings and thoughts and not have to bury them and hide them in order to go through day to day? So big questions there.
That's a whole nother podcast. But the whole idea. So the first stage, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had these 5 stages. So there's probably 22, right? All right. She never intended them to be like in order and for people to do them the way they kind of have them all set up now. But really, the first one is pretty incredible. Like, it's pretty important. Denial.
Right.
I'm fine. Saying I'm fine is denying that you have pain. And everybody wants us to be okay, because they need the world to be okay. And if you're sad and, having a hard time, then they don't know how to separate from that. And so I would say the first thing is having that awareness, and grief. When, there's a whole ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And so when you have like a certain amount, there's like 10 different things, things that happened to you as a child. And if you have more than like 6 of them, it's probably like 4, then you have, your struggle. And grief is part of that trauma. And even right now, you have kids that are in schools and they're, we've got ADHD, we've got all these different things. And part of me is just like sitting there going, it's grief. So many times, if they kind of go underneath it, you can figure out, and it might be something. I mean, just look at what we've done in the last 2 years that doesn't always necessarily deal with death, although it does, because the kids are dealing with it on the news and everything like that. But, getting back to what you asked me, the biggest thing is having that awareness, because once you have the awareness, then you can kind of accept the fact that you need to do something. And there are so many things. I mean, just having our grief center, there's 1,000 grief centers in the country. And so just knowing that there are other centers like us. But when I have 15 volunteers come for training, many of them are drawn to us because most of them have had a death experience when they were young, and they didn't have the opportunity to do their work. The good news is it's never too late. And I have people that go through the volunteer training. They're like, I've never had a space where I could talk about my brother that drowned, or I never have been able to talk to anyone about, how hard it was being 10. And, back in that day, there was, you guys didn't exist. And so just by Pattie doing her work, just by her children coming to group, there's a ripple effect that's happening with this movement to, not only acknowledge that you have grief, but have the courage. I mean, that's why we started, having that courage and that bravery to go back in the cave and kind of do the work. And it's not easy, But it's one of those things, once you start and you have other people around you that are doing it with you, it's magical, and it's healing, and it's empowering, and you come out the other side stronger than you were before your person died. I mean, it sounds kind of weird, but it's like the skills that Pattie's kids have, and already the fact that they're, giving back. When she said, she hopes she can give back, she already has. She came to our adult group. We've never done this.
Today. She's here today sharing the story too.
But we actually had her come to our adult group. And this year we've got, because of COVID, it seems like we got a whole new group of new people. And usually, then we have like some people that come in for 3-4 years. There's no time limit. Just like, the milestones, the kids, every go, oh, they're resilient. They'll get over it. You'll remarry. They'll have a new dad. They'll be fine. And you just want to go, are you kidding me? Because every time they go through a milestone, it's, they're missing. And so she came to group, and it was so precious because she's like, I miss Andrew, but I'm very happy, and it's like, you can have like pain and happiness in the same breath, in that same space. And part of it is because she has done her work. Whereas if she had said, oh, I'm remarried now and everything's great, and denied the fact that she still has pain in October during the anniversary, around the anniversary of his death, it's that, I hate the term embracing your grief, but I get it now. It's almost like you have to sit on the edge of the bed with it. And it's kind of like, right, like saddled up next to you. But if you deny it, then you carry it with you, and it's damaging, but it's like acknowledging it gives it less power, and it becomes something that you can use as a springboard to, however you do your growth. Some people use their faith, spirituality, so many different things that we can do to help process that. And the main thing, I think, is staying connected to people that know how you feel, so you don't feel like you have 3 heads when you're like, it's been 9 years and I still sob in the shower on October 22nd, or, it's just,
that was my day.
Well, it's beautiful to hear, Pattie, because I've watched her children grow up. I know that they loved doing Legos with their dad. I know that, like, we had volunteers that did pillows for the kids one year. And one of the moms that talked with Pattie knew about that, Avengers and Superman. And so she puts like Superman capes on all of their kids' pillows, and to see these kids now, I was at a youth thing. There was, 100 kids in the room, and her daughter raised her hand. She says, I went to the Children's Grief Center. And I'm like, I didn't even recognize her because she's grown up so much. And she came up to me afterwards. I was like, oh my gosh, so now she's telling kids that there's no shame in it. That's the beautiful thing. When you have a person that, the child that their dad dies, when they go to school, it's like, there's this stigma. Just like her son said, I don't want you to tell anyone. And you have to respect and honor that when a child, people say, well, I don't know what to do. Ask your child what they want. And if you got 4 kids, guess what? All 4 of them might say 4 different things.
That's for sure. It sounds like that was Pattie's case, right?
Right.
All of them.
And if 2 of them go to the same school, then you might have a problem, but just really honoring it, you're never going to get over it, but you're going to get through it. There's just so many things that I'm grateful to Pattie's whole family, for what they've given me. Because if I just had to do the business part of this, I wouldn't make it. I go to group and I sit in group and I get to be part of watching them grow. And every time I leave group, I go, that's why I do this. It fills me up because I'm not doing it. I get to watch the kids help each other. They're the ones that are making the difference. Being the witness to that is incredible.
Thank you for the work you're doing, and thank you for sharing these great resources and how it helps so many people. And it's just incredible, that support and that peer support there. I want to ask a few more questions today about, going back to something, Pattie, you talked about, like people trying to help, some people saying ridiculously bad things and some people doing great things, like you're the support your neighbors got. So I'd love to hear from both Pattie and Camille on this. And I want to preface this by, like, I'm I'm someone right now who's trying to help a friend. As I mentioned before our call, I'm up in, took a flight across the country with one of my buddies I used to backpack and get in trouble with in Japan and Southeast Asia. You know, we had a great time. He's dealing with the loss of his brother, and I didn't know what to do or what to say. And I sit there like with my phone out trying to text back and forth and like start to say something. I backtrack, and eventually I was like, hey, would it help if I came up there and had some beers with you? I don't drink much anymore, but I'm like, you know what? Would it help if I came up? He's like, yeah. So like I'm up here and I don't know if that's the right thing, but it's, you know, what, so what, I guess, what can people do? If you see a friend or a loved one who is experiencing grief, not yourself, what would help in those situations? Are there things that we should avoid doing? Is there what? Yeah, I mean, and I know it's probably not going to be a one size fits all answer, but general guidance. So what would you think would be beneficial for people to do and more importantly not to do, right? So I guess I'll stop there.
I think Pattie mentioned it a lot when she said they came and they shoveled and they mowed. And I've heard people say, yeah, they told me to put my laundry out on the porch and they did my laundry. And I love that the one woman just kept making a meal. Oh, we have too much.
Sure.
You know, that's amazing. And I would recommend that everybody listen to the Brene Brown, the empathy video. We do that in our training, and it teaches you how to be present and not try to fix the person. And that, you know, nothing can make this better for Pattie or her children. You saying, well, you know what, someday you don't know it now, but you'll meet someone, or, you know, you're lucky you still have your mom, you know, if they say to their kid, you know, so, and just what you said, you asked your friend, you know, what would you like me to do? Do you want me to come there? And I think and, you know, everybody says, oh, well, you know, call me if you need anything. And they aren't going to call.
Nobody's going to call, right?
They just aren't. And although it's interesting because in our adult group this week, somebody said that we did a exercising group this week. The kids did it and the adults. And I say the adults because sometimes both parents have died and a grandparent might bring in a child or a sibling. And so we have these hearts, and they wrote on the hearts, the kids did too, what was helpful that people say and what are things that isn't so helpful and that kind of bugs you. And then on the things that they didn't like so much, they put Band-Aids, you know, and covered them up. And, you know, one of the moms actually said, you know, everybody said, what do you need? What do you need? I don't know what I need. Right. And then she talked about, it's been a couple of years for her. And she said, and it was like, you know, I don't want to go into details, but it was like someone that you wouldn't normally reach out to. And she reached out to her and she asked her what she needed. And I was thinking, but see, she also knows where that person's coming from. So it's a little bit different, but I think it's our knee-jerk reaction to ask people, what do you need? Sure. You know, and so just know that say, can I bring this? Just like you said, would it help if I came up there? Because if they don't want you to do it, they'll say no. Or if they think, wow, I didn't even think of that. That would be great. When can I do it? Can I bring it Wednesday? I mean, be specific, because then it just ends up being months later and you didn't do it. And then you're not going to call and all that awkwardness.
Can I add to that a little bit? Another thing, and this isn't even something I think a lot of people don't know. One of the best things people can do for me, even right after Andrew died, is say his name, tell a story about him, acknowledge who he was. You know, I think I had people come up to me and say, well, I didn't want to say his name, or I didn't want to bring him up because I didn't want to make you sad. And I thought, well, it's always there. I know he died. You bringing it up isn't changing that. But tell a story. Tell something I didn't know. Send me a photo you found that you had of him that I haven't seen yet. That's one of the most beautiful gifts you could give me or my kids, is a photo of him we haven't seen or a story we haven't heard. I had people after he died, some of the nurses, even from the hospital he was in, sent me these handwritten letters talking about who he was and his character and how he was so sick. But instead of complaining about how sick he would ask about their wedding or their kids, or, and it was just, there are things I saved for my kids to show. I had his lunch lady send a letter from when he was in elementary school telling me what a neat little kid he was. And I saved that for my kids. Tell a story. If you think of something, say it. Tell them, say, hey, I have this beautiful memory and I want to share this with you. I had somebody find a video of him at a work event and they sent it to me. It was a karaoke video, which was silly, but I loved that I was able to have that. But I also think that sometimes people try to overthink, what should I do? Sometimes the little things that make sense, those are the things that, when it snows, help out with their driveway, things like that, or going to see your friend. I had a good friend come see me in person, and exactly what you're doing, get on a plane and go see your friend if you can. That's helpful. My friend from Oklahoma came to see me, and I hadn't been able to separate his ashes. I had meant to move some of them into this memorial stone that the kids and I had that has an urn in it. And for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to open the box of ashes. And my friend is a pathologist, and she deals with autopsies every day. So to her, she said, this is something I can do. And she was good friends with Andrew, and she knew him. And I asked her, I said, can you do this with me? Can we do this together? And she helped me open it and actually look at the ashes and move them into little vials and put them where I wanted them to be. But for some reason, I couldn't do that alone. I think she just wanted to come and do whatever it was that I wanted, or talk about whatever I wanted. My sister came and I wanted to paint my house, and she helped me pick out paint colors. It doesn't even matter what you do. It's just coming to see them in person is huge. I think if somebody were to send me a text right after he died, I would text back the least amount that I possibly could, so I wouldn't have to get in a big conversation. I think seeing someone in person, going to their door if you can, and just figuring out what they really could use, because sometimes I think you're too overwhelmed to know what to ask for.
Right.
When somebody sees that you have little kids and maybe it would help if I came over at this time of night, that's huge. That's a huge help. But I also think it's so important that people remember to say their name. It's okay to say their name. It's okay to say their name, and it's okay to tell a story. It's more than okay. It's please tell a story. I want to know everything about him that I didn't. I want that for my kids. I feel like my job now as his widow is to keep his memory alive, and to keep it alive for my kids so they can pass it on to their kids and know who their dad was. They knew who he was as a dad to a little kid, but they didn't know how he was more as an adult. So now that they're college age and late high school, it's really fun to tell them some of these stories from when we were in college and let them know that side of him that they never knew. So I think trying to keep somebody's memory alive is one of the kindest things you can do to someone who's lost somebody who's dear to them.
Thank you so much. And as we wrap up today, I'd like to maybe just ask a couple final questions. One important one is, we've touched on this already a little bit, but if someone is dealing with the loss of a loved one and they're going through grief and they don't know how to handle it, and maybe they haven't actively reached out for resources and things, and they don't maybe even know where to start.
So I loved the things that Pattie mentioned, for sure, the Camp Kesem and Kasim, and the widow group she told me about that in the beginning, and I just thought that was amazing. And I actually refer people to both of those things. When someone calls us, we actually now, because we're getting well known in the area, we'll actually have people call, sometimes the day the person died, which just amazes me. Mm-hmm. And they might come to group the next week. And we always tell people it depends on, where you can come and then see how it feels and come back or wait. And then we have some that maybe the death was years ago, but now the child's 10, like Pattie was talking about, and the grief's coming up in a different way. So they'll come. And the first thing we do sometimes is offer them some books, or if somebody calls and says, well, I have a friend and their dad died and they have kids. So we will give them a package of books that they can, there's one, it's called I Miss You. And it's like a conversation between a small child and the adult that's reading it. And it gives them that space, like Pattie was talking about, to be able to talk about the person. There's a couple really wonderful websites I refer a lot, whatsyourgrief.com, two young women, Litsa and Eleanor. They have great podcasts. The Dougie Center, Dougie.org out in Portland, Oregon, is one of the biggest centers in the country, and that's who we were trained by. They have a whole list of podcasts, Grief Out Loud, just amazing. Healgrief.org has actually an app. What they've learned as young adults, it's kind of a lost age, that 18 to 24. It's like, what do they do when they've had a death and they go back home and they, and then they go back to college, or there's not a lot of resources for them, but it's called an app that Fran Solomon started, and it's called Actively Moving Forward. And it's specifically for 18 to 24, and then they have a little bit older group, and there's a spot on there for professionals, and so there's a lot of wonderful resources. Probably the best place to start, and I should have mentioned this first, is the National Alliance for Grieving Children. They changed their name now. It's a National Alliance for Children's Grief, but they have, you can, grief resources by you, and you can plug in your state and your city, and it'll pop up if there is a grief center by you. And then there's wonderful resources for schools. The Coalition for Grieving Students and NAGC partnered, and they've got school resource kits. And it's knowing where to look for. But what's wonderful is now there actually is, support. Whereas I would say 10 years ago, there wasn't anything like it is today. And so we're really fortunate.
I would add to that the widowed group that I found incredibly helpful. It's called Soaring Spirits International, and they have weekend events called Camp Widow, but they also have online widowed support groups, and they have them for people who have lost spouses for all different reasons, illness, sudden death, suicide, all different things. There's, breakout groups. You can get into really specific groups. You could talk to other widows with children. It's that's an incredible resource as well. And the camp that my kids were involved in, this is cancer specific, but it's called Camp Chasm. And it's a camp for kids who are affected by a parent's cancer. And they provide 1 week a year of free summer camp. It's also supported by donations for kids who are either going through a parent's illness or a parent's death. And that's been an incredible organization as well. And that's through universities throughout the country. I know in Michigan here, they have it at Michigan State, and I believe at Grand Valley, and also at University of Michigan.
Excellent. Well, thank you for those resources. And for our listeners, we'll have some resource guides. If you follow us on Facebook, you can find these resource guides, and we're going to have those posted so you can easily find those if that's something that you are needing, or someone that you know and care about as would potentially need as well. As we wrap up today, I just want to thank you both for being here, but I'd like to ask, do you have any final words for our listeners today? Just any last final thoughts as we wrap up?
Thank you for taking the time to listen, so that, I always say, hope you never need us, but if you know of somebody that does, you'll have now the knowledge to help yourself or them. And I only hope that you would consider stepping into that cave of grief, as scary as it is in the darkness, but there's hope and light like you will ever know if you can just connect with other people who know how you feel. And I just appreciate everybody's time. And Pattie, you're amazing, and you're one of my inspirations, and we will be lifetime friends, I know, and you will continue to teach me how to do what I do so that I can help others. So thank you for your courage and your strength, and I adore you and your kids.
Well, thank you. And Camille, thank you for everything that you've done for me and for my family. You are truly amazing. And we wouldn't be where we are today without you. Also, I know that for me, when I was first widowed, the most helpful thing for me was hearing stories of people who had been through it, but were okay, that found a way to be happy and get on with life and be happy. So if my story even helps one person realize that there's hope and they'll be okay, then I feel like then it was worth coming on and telling my story. So I do hope that that helps other people, even if it seems like you'll never be okay. Just hearing that somebody else is doing okay, I always found that helpful for myself. So I'm hoping that helps someone else.
Well, thank you both so much, and thank you for your courage to be here today, for sharing your stories, for sharing the amazing work you're doing. And I echo your sentiments. I hope as long as if this reaches at least one person who needs to hear this, I'm thankful for taking the time, for you all taking the time for being here today to share. So thank you again.
Thank you.
You can stay connected with the Visibility Project by subscribing, liking, and sharing on your favorite podcasting and social apps. Look for us at the Visibility PRJ.
Financial support is needed to keep the conversation going. Go to midlandfoundation.org/give and select the Cultural Awareness Coalition Endowment Fund to be part of the project. Note podcast in your donation notes.
Thank you for listening.
We see you.
We hear you.
And together, we are making a difference.